Imagine you and your team have worked long hours on an important project that will benefit the lives of millions of people. Imagine your entire career, your reputation, all your hard work comes down to a single moment, a new discovery that promises to save lives. Imagine the discovery was your idea, and very few people know the details. Now imagine just 24 hours from the press conference where you plan to reveal your discovery to the world, promise and fame and fortune. You learn a rival team released your result, word for word. How would you feel? Probably not very good. Now suppose we change just one detail. Suppose it's you who found a report that contains groundbreaking details. You don't know where the report came from or who lost it, but you do know that the report will save lives. Do you publish it as your own? What if you had the assurance that no one will ever know the report was not your original work? Do you publish it? Hi, my name is Matthew Pride, and I'm here today to talk about morality and justice within the military profession. During my year at the Command and General Staff College, I studied the morality and legality of lethal remotely piloted aircraft, or RPA for short. You might better recognize RPA as drones. I titled my report, "The Gyges Effect, an ethical critique of remotely piloted aircraft." The name Gyges refers to a short story from the Republic, written by the Greek philosopher Plato in 360 BC. You see, Gyges was a real person in history. He was a king of Lydia in 700 BC, which is in the western region of modern-day Turkey. But his ascension to power, for reasons we don't quite know, became the source of legend. Plato used Gyges' story as a way to explore the nature and origin of justice. According to legend, Gyges started life as a poor shepherd. All the accounts begin there. But here is where Plato takes an interesting twist. One day, after an earthquake, Gyges stumbles across a cave, and in it, he found the ring on a finger of a dead giant. And it was no ordinary ring. You see, when Gyges put the ring on and turned it, he could become invisible. And with his new power, he committed acts of seduction and murder, not acts of justice and charity. Gyges became king, and men honored him for it. And with this story, Plato posed whether anyone would act just under the condition they could do injustice without being seen while still being thought just. In other words, if you had the chance to publish a report that was not your original work, and everyone gave you credit, and the report saved lives, what would stop you? Justice? This, the antagonist from Plato's Republic argued, this we may truly affirm to be a great proof that a man is just not willingly or because he thinks that justice is any good to him individually, but of necessity. For wherever anyone thinks he can safely be unjust, there he is unjust. U.S. military research quite differently in doctrine that the Army professionals' moral awareness and sensitivity is required for legally and morally justifiable action. That bears repeating. The Army professionals' moral awareness and sensitivity is required for legal and moral justifiable action. So on the one hand, you see, we have the military professional who is required by the profession to take only legally and morally justifiable action, the just combatant. And on the other hand, we have the unjust combatant, who many today will see as being a radical, violent extremist. And we have the classic struggle that we're all comfortable with since childhood. Good versus evil. The good guys, naturally us, versus the bad guys, them. And we all know how the story ends. We know good guys always win. Let it surprise you that this is not a struggle between us and them. Let it sink in that inside each of us, there is a struggle between the choice to do good and the choice to do wrong, to be just or to be unjust. And it is a choice, and we all face it. My research question was, does the United States violate the legal and moral standards in the use of RPA to conduct military strikes? Well, 1 year and 120 or so pages later, I concluded, somewhat unspectacularly I might also add, no, the RPA policy upholds the military traditions of war, but only if a lawful combatant pilots an aircraft remotely to strike a high payoff target as part of a congressional authorization to use proportional force and the operational stands a reasonable chance of success. If all the conditions are valid, then the intrinsic moral quality of the act itself as being legal and moral upholds. My conclusion depends on legality as defined by the international humanitarian law, or also known as the law of armed conflict, undergirded by just war theory, which also supplies the legal framework to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It also depends on morality as defined by the Christian theologians, right in since the first century, who understood moral good to possess a concrete form, three principal elements that shape and explain human activity. They are object, intent, and circumstance. Now, more can certainly be said on these subjects, but seeing that just war and moral theology both have their root in Western society and derive from Judeo-Christian tradition, it seemed reasonable to me, at least, to use their framework to supply the standards needed for a thorough critique. The Gyges effect is when individuals blithely accept as legal and moral the targeted killing of enemy combatants while unseen, from a distance, with impunity and zero risk to their person. You see, critics argue that the pilot of the RPA is immoral, being unseen when he kills. Though, like a sniper, which is nothing new, snipers are vulnerable. Their lives are in imminent peril being on the battlefield. They will further argue the pilot of an RPA is immoral at a distance when he kills. Though like a field artilleryman, which is nothing new, field artillerymen risk counter battery and other spoiling attacks. They will further argue that the pilot of an RPA experiences zero risk when he kills. Though like a sailor who launches a rocket from a naval destroyer, once again, nothing new, the sailor spends countless nights away from home, surrounded by heavy machinery at sea, a legitimate military target. Even the uniform itself is waived as the Air Force now hires civilian contractors to pilot the RPA up to the moment where a combatant makes the decision to pull the trigger. Something the Air Force agrees is a uniformed professional's legal and moral obligation. See, the critics will argue that the pilot of an RPA benefits from all the same legal and moral status of being a lawful combatant, with zero the effects, zero the amount of inherent risk or peril, or even physical discomfort or personal sacrifice that goes along with traditional military service. The Gyges effect. In other words, the pilot of an RPA is like someone who takes credit for work that is not their own. confident overall in its greater good, and what is a little harm in receiving public gratitude for a little dirty work. When faced with the scathing indictment, and it is scathing, that the RPA pilot benefits from all the same legal and moral status of being a lawful combatant with zero of the effects, supporters of the policy will argue that it's not entirely accurate. RPA pilots are spared injury. See, Lieutenant Colonel retired Dave Grossman, writing in 1995 and gleaning much from SLA Marshall's work on proximity combat, argued in his book On Killing that the closer in range a human is to his human target, the greater the initial response needs to be to overcome the resistance of killing. In contrast, the greater the distance, the less difficult it is to kill. In other words, it's harder to kill when you're at knife range, less difficult to kill when you're hundreds of miles away. And this makes sense. However, RPAs, through their advanced sophisticated imagery and real-time video feed, reduces the sensory range of killing to within meters, while simultaneously physically separating the target and the combatant by thousands of miles. And this has caused a degree of cognitive dissonance in the minds of lawful combatants who carry out the business of killing for their country. It seems, after all, that they indeed risk injury. It's a moral injury. The moral injury inflicted on RPA operators who watch the consequence of their actions in real time is deep, and it's real. All at once, the RPA pilots take into themselves all the combat roles and responsibilities of the sniper, the field artilleryman, and the Navy rocket launcher. And if anything, their combat experience is heightened, since their minds must replicate all the other experiences of combat to account for the images they view with depressing regularity. Distant violence becomes at once strange, yet familiar, intimate, remote, present, yet not really there. In other words, the RPA pilot is like the one who finds a report that will save lives. But rather than publish it, they reproduce its entire content, absorbing the roles of all who contributed to it, and the work becomes overwhelming. So here's my judgment. It would be prudent for our leaders to revisit the policy to ensure it firmly sets on moral and legal ground. Moreover, we should review national policy to ensure that true legal and moral action ultimately and quite purposefully leads to order, peace, and tranquility for individuals and for society. While the RPA policy is legal and moral, one is compelled to question whether it is wise. Can it really lead to the sort of habits military professionals need to lead just lives, to make just decisions, to pursue just ends? I fear the policy leaves military professionals too easily susceptible to falling victim to the Gyges effect, even as the policy is legal and moral. Still, my thesis work sought to demonstrate that national values in the Army ethic lie as bedrock for Army leadership and decision making. You see, strict adherence to the Army ethic and to national values will keep the Army professional from succumbing to the Gyges effect so long as they continually strive to master the profession. Okay, so once again, you find a report and it contains details that will save lives. You don't know where it came from, you don't know who lost it, but you sense an urgency to publish it. Do you allow yourself to dispense with justice for what you believe to be the greater good? Do the ends ever justify the means? Do you dispel moral awareness and numb the sensitivity we must nurture to do what is right, what is legal and moral? If you sense an easier way avails, Where do you draw the line? That is your challenge to answer, and it is our burden as Army professionals. Thank you.